This is my intro. There are many others like it, but this one is mine.
Hello, sports fans. How are you doing? This is Dan coming to you on this fine day from Canada. It's great to see you all. So today's episode is kind of a follow-up to the last one. It was requested by a fan. I want to answer, what is a trade war? A trade war is what happens when war is conducted by economics. I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but the technical term is that countries have become involved in a series of retaliations over trade policy and protectionism. Like, say, for example, the United States started a trade war with China under the Obama administration because they didn't like the way that the Chinese were building economic ties with other countries in the region. It was fine when China was selling them cheap goods and services, but the moment they started moving up the value chain and seriously trading with other Asian countries, that became a problem. And for example, today, China's number one trade partner collectively are the ASEAN countries, or I don't know the acronym, but it's generally speaking the countries in Southeast Asia in China's neighborhood, which on paper it should make sense. Although when you think about it, in places like Africa, which are still coming out of imperialism, a lot of countries in that region do not do the majority of their trade with their neighboring partners, and this is very much by design. So, like I said, our number one example is the trade war right now between China and the USA, which was actually started by the USA under Barack Obama. I've got the Brookings Institute paper to prove it. Now, there's a number of ways that countries can conduct trade wars. Generally speaking, everybody knows about tariffs. I covered that last time. Those are a sales tax on goods from outside the country. But there's also domestic subsidies, where domestic producers get a nice little bonus from the government for every bit of good they produce, or the government underwrites their costs in some way. There's also import quotas, where there's just a flat-out ban over a certain number of foreign goods every year. And examples of this being quite successful in building a country's industrial base are places like South Korea and Japan, who did use quite a bit of protectionism to build themselves up from being bombed to the Stone Age, if I'm being completely honest. And in the case of Japan, even though it's a loyal US ally, the United States retaliated and won a trade war with them through the Plaza Accords, where Ronald Reagan basically tanked their entire economy and destroyed their manufacturing base. And Japan has basically been a basket case ever since. People want to talk about North Korea, but Japan is the real basket case. China, for the last 10 years, they've had economic growth of about 5 or 6% per year. Japan had 5 or 6% growth over the last 30 years. So that's what's up with Japan, and why we no longer talk about Japan as being the dominant player in the electronics market or the car market. They still have manufacturing, but they have greatly financialized their economy. And the difference between China and the US and Japan is that China has an actual independent government. They're run by a communist party that's not beholden to a local capitalist class, or the capitalist class in the USA for that matter, and they're saying no. And as we've seen, the United States has blinked. Now, unlike Japan, the United States is not going to win this trade war because the only surplus that the USA has is for services, primarily financial services. The USA doesn't really build anything except for weapons, and as we've seen, those are hideously overpriced, and they are meant to make money rather than to win wars. Because if you win the war is over and you can't make money anymore selling weapons. That was the whole premise of the war on terror. You have a bunch of expensive systems that you use mostly to shoot people with no air force and no standing army, and that was how it went for a long time. So we'll see how this trade war plays out. My personal take is that China is going to win this because they control roughly half of the world's manufacturing once you add in value-added manufacturing. Another reason that China is probably going to win the trade war is that they do have controls over capital. So unlike Japan, they're not just going to allow capital flight. Money is not going to leave the country without their say-so. In fact, they have a dual currency system, the renminbi, where they have a local currency and a currency for international trade. So there is capital controls in China. With Japan and the Plaza Accords, they basically had to end all capital controls, and that destroyed the competitiveness of Japanese industry. So I hope this has been somewhat insightful. It's a little bit of a dry topic, but it's important and worth bearing. And I think it's good talking about because it affects us all. I live in Canada. We're basically an American vassal state. Everywhere I go, we see signs that say proudly made in Canada, but again, nothing is really made in Canada. And even though we talk a big game about independence from the USA, there's no real move to reindustrialize. There's an emphasis on more raw materials extraction. People have talked about invading again native lands to take what is theirs and sell the raw materials, most likely to the USA and done by US companies. But there's no real attempt to industrialize. So, anyways, I hope this has been helpful. I've put a few links in the description to help smooth over the process and give you more information. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment, let me know if you have any questions or other topics you'd like covered in the future, and have a fantastic day.
This is my outro. There are many others like it, but this one is mine.